Good morning, Patrick here live, Complete Health, and I just wanted to talk about a guy that I really like, and his name is Dr. Joe Dispenza. I've followed his work for several years, probably. I've read about 3 of his books. I've listened to hours and hours of his content, and I'll probably attend a few of his seminars, but essentially what I wanted to go through is the idea of setting the intention or setting the thought or action in process. Now, Dr. Joe Dispenza was a chiropractor, and he was involved in a very serious car accident where he was on his bike. I think he was, if I remember the story correctly, he was doing a triathlon, and he was hit from his bike by someone driving an SUV, and he's actually American, so obviously a majority of people are driving big cars, and as a result he thinks, from what he can recall from the series of events, that he was dragged along the floor for several meters before the person in the car actually realized what was going on, by which time he'd actually fractured several bones in his spine. For him, the doctors basically wanted to put him through surgery, and I think he ended up having about 5 or 6 different opinions from different surgeons around the States, and all of them basically agreed that surgery was really his only option. Being a chiropractor and having a spinal issue, he was like, no, I'm not having spinal surgery. Morning, I'm not having spinal surgery, it's absolutely not happening. And eventually the doctors basically gave up with him because they realized that he wasn't going to change his mind. And eventually he managed to get in contact with a doctor that agreed to take on his case without doing spinal surgery. And he actually eventually made a full recovery with absolutely no surgery, his whole body completely repaired. And he went back to working as a chiropractor full time in practice and started teaching people about how to change the mind, to set the mind up to create healing and create change and create behavioral changes. So he's written several books. The first one I believe that he wrote was Evolve Your Brain, and his most recent one is called Becoming the Supernatural. And within his books, he talks about the concept we have to change the mindset. We have to change the mindset in order to change the outcome. And so in order to create the thing, you have to create the intention first. So say, for example, obviously it's all well and good that we all want to become fit. We all want to become fit, but you cannot become fit without actually setting the intention of doing something that's going to allow you to make that change. Now, what our brain is a series of patterns. It's very good at learning. So initially when you do something that you don't like or something different, it will create that kind of like gut feeling that you don't like. And that's because you're having to use a different part of the brain, and the brain is not using patterns that are recognized. However, what we know is that our body needs to be in stress for some level of time, but it needs to be the right types of stress. So moving into that discomfort zone or a system or pattern interrupt can sometimes be quite good. And in certain examples, it's really good. So pretty much everyone will know someone that has been in a relationship where they really should have outed out that relationship a lot earlier than they did, but yet they stay in the relationship for the reason that they don't feel like they can break that cycle. And again, that's the autopilot. Now, the thing is when they do eventually get themselves out of that relationship, what do they generally do? Well, they go and find someone else that behaves in a very similar way. And it's because the brain recognizes those patterns, and our brain really likes familiarity. Now, this is the same problem that I have with a lot of my patients, not necessarily with their a lot of the time with their behaviors, because they're performing unhealthy behaviors, and as a result, they cannot stop, e.g. stuff like smoking, drinking, not exercising, standing with bad posture, because these are all system patterns that our brain has had to learn. So as a result, what we have to do is interrupt that pattern. So initially, we have to create the intention. E.g., if you want to stand with good posture, you have to visualize and understand what that looks like and do it intentionally, so that eventually you can create that new pattern in the brain so that your brain can do it automatically. Now, what we tend to use is we tend to use our frontal lobe in our brain when things are in pattern. However, when you have to learn something new, you have to use different parts, including the parietal and especially if it's for something like movement, you have to use the cerebellar cortexes and other parts of the brain in order to learn new movements. And it's only once it's actually been engaged and ingrained into our neurology that we'll then start to use that frontal cortex. So if you want to create a healthy habit, you first have to visualize it. You then have to then understand what actions you need to take place. You also need to understand how it feels to be in that. So the idea of meditation to a lot of people seems really almost woo-woo and a little bit out of the ordinary or kind of like Tibetan-y monk type thing. But really the idea of meditation is really to set the intention of what it is that you want to achieve. It gives you that time and that space to actually understand how or what it is you're going to do and set the intention so that you can take the action. If you can, funny enough, they've done brain scans of what happens, and Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this in his book again, that if you take a brain scan of someone doing meditation and visualizing certain things, certain parts of the brain will light up. Now, if you get them to visualize certain feelings, a different part of the brain will light up. If you get them to visualize an action, e.g. playing the piano, a different part of the brain lights up. And if you get them to visualize, say, for example, walking in certain directions or walking down road maps, different parts of the brain light up. So even with just setting up the brain or thinking about the action, we actually start to set up those pathways so we can strengthen those. So guys, if you want to learn a little bit more about pattern interrupt, I would definitely suggest diving deeper into Dr. Joe Dispenza's books. Tony Robbins talks about this stuff a lot. He talks about pattern interrupt. He talks about making like a silly something. So if you notice you're doing a pattern of something that you really hate the fact that you're doing, it might be smoking, it might be not exercising, it might be exercising too much, it might be overeating. He talks about actually doing a pattern interrupt where you do something that's really stupid, like a chicken dance. And if you had to do that in a public place because you overate, eventually the pain of doing that thing will outweigh the wanting to eat the food. So if you want to learn a little bit more about these things, you can dive deeper into Tony Robbins' books, you can dive deeper into Joe Dispenza's book, or equally you can just drop us a message or a comment on here. I'd be happy to run through some of the information that I've got as well. Guys, it's a pleasure to speak to you again, and we'll speak to you again soon. Patrick here from Complete Health, and you have a lovely day in this lovely rainy weather. Take care.